There were eggs burning in the skillet, smoke curling up into the ceiling fan like a ghost no one invited. And still, neither of us moved. She stood by the hallway, barefoot, one arm across her chest like she was hugging herself. A suitcase rested by the door, mine, though I hadn't packed it. She had. "I'm not asking," she said, voice steadier than I expected. "I'm telling you, it's over." The eggs sizzled violently. I could hear the yolks bubbling, splitting open, almost mocking how fragile everything had become. I didn't look at her, not because I was angry, but because I had already seen everything I needed to. Last night, I had driven out to the parking lot behind Deerfield Motel. I waited. I waited longer than any man should have to. And when her car finally pulled in, she didn't even bother hiding it. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't nervous. She wore the black leather jacket I gave her 2 Christmases ago. Only now it wasn't zipped, and under it, barely anything. He met her at the door. I didn't know his name then, but I knew his face. It was the same face that showed up on our back porch 3 weeks earlier asking if we'd seen his dog. I remember shaking his hand. He'd had her scent on him even then. So when she said, "It's over," all I did was turn off the stove. Let the pan hiss in protest. Let the kitchen fill with the smell of something overcooked, something ruined. I walked past her without a word, just as she wanted. But what she didn't realize, what she never imagined, was that I had already been 2 steps ahead. She thought she was closing the book. I was about to rip out the last chapter and rewrite the ending myself. I didn't go far that morning, just around the corner. She thought I left, that I drove off like some broken-hearted ex-husband-to-be, too spineless to confront her or demand an explanation. That was the version she needed me to be, silent, small, insignificant. I sat in my truck, engine off, hidden behind the rusted fence of the construction site that backed onto our neighborhood. From there, I had a direct line of sight to our front door, and I waited. It took 6 minutes. That's how long it took for her to close the door behind me, breathe out, and pull out her phone. I knew what I'd see before I saw it. Still, when her face lit up and her tone flipped from cold to flirty in a heartbeat, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips, that same stupid smile I hadn't seen in months now reserved for someone else. She said, "He's gone." Then she smiled wider and added, "Come over." He did. I'd give him credit, he was fast. 12 minutes later, the same man who stood on our porch with fake stories about a missing dog walked right back through our front door like he owned it. She greeted him in the sweater I bought her last fall, the one she once called her safe place. Her arms wrapped around his neck like she was welcoming home soldier. A hero, a prize. Meanwhile, I sat there, watching everything. I wasn't paralyzed with sadness. That part was gone now. Burned out the night, I followed her the first time and saw them together behind that dimly lit motel window, her legs wrapped around his waist, his hands tangled in her hair like they'd done it 100 times before. I had filmed it. I hated myself for that, the shame of holding a camera, documenting my own humiliation. But it wasn't just for me anymore. It was for what would come next. You see, I hadn't left that house defeated. I left to begin something carefully, quietly orchestrated. The man, his name was Calvin, I would learn, had no idea that he'd just walked into a legal nightmare. Because our home? It had security cameras. Real ones. Not the fake deterrents she thought I'd installed as a half-baked project years ago. No, the real feed went to a hidden server I kept off-site. It recorded everything. Every kiss. Every moan. Every betrayal. Now backed up 6 ways to Sunday. And there was more. Because while she had spent months lying to me, I had been quietly talking to a lawyer. Not the kind with a cheap billboard ad and a cheesy slogan. A real one. A strategist. The kind who told me, stay calm, stay quiet, and let her walk straight into the fire. And she had. That morning, while she thought she was finally free of me, she made the mistake of putting everything in writing. A cheerful little text, sent from her phone to her lover, confirming not only that she orchestrated my departure, but that she had packed my stuff herself because she was tired of pretending. My lawyer would eat that alive. So, I waited another 45 minutes. Then I drove off, not in sadness, not in fear, but with the calm of a man holding every card in the deck, waiting for the right moment to flip them over. She thought I was out of the picture. She had no idea I was just getting ready to frame hers. 3 days passed before I made my next move. I didn't text her, didn't call. I let her stew in the false calm she had created for herself. The silence wasn't an accident. It was the rope, and she was the one tightening it. On the fourth morning, I drove down to the edge of Kensington Road, a place we used to visit for weekend coffee and book browsing back when our marriage still had weight. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was meeting someone I hadn't told her I ever knew. His name was Ellis Granger, and he wasn't a lawyer. He was something much colder, an investigator for a corporate risk firm. I met him through a friend in construction law after I casually mentioned I was just curious about someone snooping around my property a few weeks back. Ellis had done a background check, then a digital trace, then a full dig. Turned out Calvin, the man now occupying my wife's bed, had a far more colorful past than she was aware of. 6 jobs in 5 years. No fixed tax record. An expunged assault case from out of state. And a civil lawsuit quietly settled just 2 years ago, involving workplace coercion and manipulation. In short, he was the kind of man who knew how to hide in plain sight. And he was dangerous. Not in the punch-you kind of way, but in the kind of way where everything around you turns to ash while he walks away clean. And my wife, Charlotte, was his next piece of leverage. I sat across from Ellis at the cafe while he handed me a thin manila folder with everything inside. There were photos, records, voice message snippets, screenshots of texts Calvin had sent to other women while he was still fooling around with my wife. And then came the final twist. Calvin wasn't just sleeping with her. He was also using her. There were 2 names listed in the documents. Both were former acquaintances of Calvin's. Both had lost significant personal assets after becoming romantically involved with him. One had been gently coerced into investing in a startup idea. Another had signed a lease in her name for a car he never paid for. Charlotte had a high credit limit. Joint accounts she could dip into without raising alarms. She was perfect for someone like him. Naive, emotional, hungry to be wanted, and easy to manipulate. Ellis finished his coffee and said something I won't forget. She thinks she's finally chosen herself. What she doesn't realize is he chose her first and not for love. I drove home, if I could still call a home, feeling like my chest was holding too much information and not enough breath. I parked 2 blocks away again, took out my phone, and opened the folder of videos. I clicked one, a short clip from the hidden camera in the living room. Charlotte and Calvin, sitting close. She was laughing, legs draped across his lap, holding a wine glass she had once told me she'd only ever use for special moments. Then, mid-laugh, Calvin glanced around, lowered his voice, and said, "You think he left all on his own?" She stopped laughing. "You helped him go," he added. "But trust me, baby, you did it perfectly." That was the moment I knew. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd been coached through it. Used. Played. I leaned back in my truck, letting the weight of everything sink in. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was a slow theft. A con job. A game of psychological chess. And she was in check, too proud to see it. But I saw it. And now, I wasn't just leaving her. I was going to let her fall. Right into the hands of the man she thought loved her. Because sometimes, you don't have to push people toward the edge. You just have to let them walk off it. By the end of that week, Charlotte was glowing. She posted a photo on Instagram, just a wine glass on our balcony, the caption, "Finally breathing again." She never said my name, never referenced the divorce. But it didn't matter. Anyone who knew us knew what she was saying. She was free. She was winning. What she didn't know was that I had full access to everything she posted. Her social media accounts, her emails, even her private messages. Not because I hacked her, but because she once insisted we share everything. Passwords, calendar access, even our cloud backups. Total transparency, she had said, back when she still wanted to impress me with honesty. She never changed a single password. I watched her rebuild her version of life. Brunches, flirty selfies, that stupid healing journey playlist she made public. Her new world was polished, soft-lit, and curated to perfection. Except it wasn't real, because beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to spread. The first one came when I froze our joint credit cards. Just the one she assumed I'd forget. Not the obvious accounts. She'd already drained those. I'm talking about the backup Visa we'd used for home repairs and one emergency-only Amex she probably thought I'd lost. Both were suddenly declined on the same afternoon. I didn't need to be there to hear it. I watched her check the app twice, then again, her face twitching. The second crack came when I messaged her mother, casually, politely, asking for a notarized copy of Charlotte's birth certificate. For the lawyer, I said. That got back to her in minutes. I wasn't threatening her. I wasn't even speaking to her. But she felt it. The silence wasn't safe anymore. Calvin, however, was still enjoying the performance. I saw it in how relaxed he had become around her. He went from showing up in the evenings to staying overnight, from carrying one duffel bag to unpacking into my closet. I watched him steal my socks, wear my hoodie, drink from my favorite mug. He was marking territory like a stray dog. But dogs don't realize when the ground beneath them is hollow. And Calvin had no idea what I'd planted there. See, a few days earlier, I'd sent an anonymous tip to the HR department of the company where Charlotte used to work. The tip included a name, Calvin, and the suggestion that he had been coercing personal access to an employee's private systems during the time she was employed. I attached a few blurred screenshots of her messages and ended it with, "Might be worth looking into. This could become public." Now, Calvin didn't work there, and Charlotte had left 3 months ago. But the company? Highly corporate, highly sensitive. They ran quiet audits on every report they received, especially ones involving internal security breaches. Within 48 hours, someone from the compliance office sent a routine access check email to Calvin's registered email. And just like that, he started panicking. He confronted Charlotte. I know this because I watched the conversation from 2 different angles thanks to the silent camera in the living room and the audio recorder and the fake diffuser on the side table. "Did you give him my name?" he hissed. "Did you say something?" "I didn't say anything, Calvin." "Why would I?" "Well, someone sure as hell did." Her voice cracked. That was the first time she looked afraid. And I knew. She finally felt it. The tension, the shift, the uncertainty, the same emotional nausea I'd lived with for months while she built her secret life right under my nose. Except now the nausea was hers. I paused the footage and let the still image sit on my screen. Calvin pacing, Charlotte clutching a pillow. My home, now a stage for their unraveling. And I was in the front row, popcorn in hand. I didn't need revenge. What I wanted was erosion. Slow, inevitable, unstoppable. And as they sat in my living room, arguing over shadows they didn't understand, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because I was winning, but because they were finally starting to realize no one escapes the fire when they build the house from dry lies. And the spark? I was holding it. The beauty of silence is that it makes people start talking to fill it. That's what happened next. They thought they were alone, safe, in control. But my house wasn't just a house. It was a memory palace full of ghosts they couldn't see. And those ghosts whispered everything back to me. I had no interest in hearing them. Until one particular night when Charlotte forgot to close the bedroom door, and the camera, the one hidden inside the ceiling smoke detector, picked up more than I expected. It started like any other recording. Him shirtless, her curled up beside him, legs entangled like they'd been doing this for years. But the words, those were different this time, because he had questions now. The cracks in their fantasy had begun to widen. "You sure he's not coming back?" Calvin asked, voice lower than usual. Charlotte laughed. "Wendell?" "No." He walked away like a wounded animal. I basically told him to go. And he didn't say anything? Nope, nothing. Just left. That's the thing with Wendell. He breaks easy. I could see it in Calvin's eyes, the flicker of doubt. Because something wasn't sitting right with him. Charlotte had misread my silence as surrender. But to someone like Calvin, who lived off control, silence was a threat. A move without a signal. Then came the moment I've been waiting for. "I've been thinking," he said, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe we should get the house in your name." Make things cleaner if this goes long term. Charlotte sat up. What do you mean? I mean, if we're together now, there's no reason you shouldn't own this place outright. Especially if he's not fighting for it. Might as well make it official. Her face tightened. It was subtle, a flicker in her cheek, a clench of the jaw. She hadn't seen that twist coming. And just like that, the first seed of mistrust bloomed. She wasn't ready to lose the house. Not yet. Not unless she had full control of him. And clearly she didn't. That's what I had counted on. Her mistake wasn't cheating. That was just a symptom. Her real mistake was thinking she was the smartest person in the room, that she could script every outcome and still keep everything. The lover, the freedom, the house, the money, the dignity. But she never asked why I left without a single word. Never wondered what I didn't say. And now that Calvin had introduced the idea of ownership, of titles and signatures, she started realizing she didn't know him as well as she thought either. The next morning, I acted. From a library 2 towns over, I printed 2 documents. One was a quiet transfer of ownership form I had legally drafted with my lawyer weeks earlier. It transferred my share of the house into a blind trust with my name still tied to it, but with Charlotte's name completely removed as a successor. It looked official. It looked clean. The second was a false version. I slid that one into a crisp envelope and mailed it to the house. Attention, Charlotte Mallory, legal property update. No return address. Just a thick document and a signature line already marked. She received it 2 days later. I watched her open it on the living room couch, the same place where I once held her after her father's funeral. Now she sat cross-legged, a highlighter between her teeth, pretending to understand the language of ownership. She didn't. Calvin leaned over, reading it too, and I could almost hear the calculations in his head. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Charlotte, unaware of the switch, thought she was being handed the house. Calvin thought he was getting access to it through her. Both were wrong. And when she finally said the words, "Should I sign it?" I paused the recording. I didn't need to watch more. They were chasing an illusion. And the moment that paper hit the mailbox and was returned, they'd discover it wasn't a gift. It was a detonator. All I had to do was wait. And while they fumbled through greed, suspicion, and the mess they created together, I was already somewhere else, already planning the next, final reveal. Because in the end, Charlotte's greatest weakness wasn't that she betrayed me. It's that she thought betrayal was the end of the story. It wasn't. It was just the prologue. The call came at 2:13 a.m. Not from her. Not from Calvin. Not from anyone I'd expected. It was from her sister, Dana. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. She never liked me. Too quiet. Too cautious. Said I made Charlotte smaller, whatever that meant. But something in her voice that night cut through everything. "I know what she did," she said. No greeting, no hesitation. I was still half asleep, sitting on the edge of a cheap motel bed in a town no one visits unless they're hiding from something. But her words pulled me straight into full consciousness. "Dana, what are you talking about?" She exhaled into the phone like she'd been holding it for months. "She told me you walked out on her, that you ran. But I just saw Calvin, at a bar, with another woman, and Charlotte doesn't know." My mind locked in. Dana wasn't calling to help me. She was calling because something cracked in her, and she couldn't hold it anymore. Apparently, Calvin had a pattern, a method. He'd done this before, twice that Dana knew of. Once to a friend of hers back in Arizona. Another time to a woman he met during some out-of-town retreat. Both relationships ended in chaos. Both women were financially gutted by the end of it. Dana didn't have hard evidence. But she had one thing better, guilt. "She's too blind to see it," she said, quieter now. "And I was stupid for letting her think you were the problem." I didn't respond right away. I was already replaying Calvin's voice in my head, trying to match timelines, trying to make sense of a man who operated like fog. Impossible to hold, everywhere at once, but always just out of reach. Dana offered one final piece. "There's an account," she said. "Charlotte has it. She's hiding it from both of you. In her maiden name." That stopped me. "Why are you telling me this now?" There was a long pause. "Because I think he's going to hurt her. And I think you're the only one who sees it coming." I wrote down the name, See betrayal. An old identity she hadn't used in over a decade. The name she had before we got married. I never even knew she kept the account, but apparently she had it open again just 3 weeks after I left the house. She was preparing for something too. That changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't about betrayal or control anymore. This was about survival. If Calvin found out about that account, if he suspected she was moving assets behind his back, he wouldn't lash out with anger. He'd turn strategic. He'd isolate her, manipulate her, strip her down psychologically until she couldn't tell the difference between dependence and devotion. And I'd seen what that looked like in other women's eyes. In reports, in footage Ellis had shown me, stories with no happy ending. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I still loved her, but because she didn't deserve to be devoured by the very monster she chose over me. So I acted. I called Ellis, told him to start digging into any financial trails tied to the betrayal name. Set a burner number to monitor any movement tied to Calvin's GPS devices. Yes, devices, plural. I'd installed a second tracker weeks ago, not in the car, but in a small Bluetooth keychain Calvin had pocketed one night after rummaging through what he thought was my forgotten junk drawer. I had counted on his arrogance. That keychain was feeding me his location, his habits, and now, his growing distance from Charlotte. Because here's what Dana didn't know. Calvin was already preparing to disappear. He had started visiting a storage unit on the south end of the county. Quiet place. No cameras. Registered under a fake name I traced back to a rental identity. And every time he left, he stayed just a little longer. Whatever he was building there, whatever he was preparing, it wasn't just an exit. It was an extraction from her life, from my house, from whatever secret Charlotte thought she was still in control of. I looked out my motel window, the neon buzzing, the world outside gray and empty. The game wasn't over, but someone new had just joined the board. And this time, the consequences wouldn't just be emotional. They'd be irreversible. The weather turned on a Wednesday. Thunder rolled in, heavy and slow, the kind that rattles window panes and makes every creak in the house sound personal. I was still off-grid, watching everything unfold through layers of screens and silence when it happened. It was supposed to be nothing. Just another night where she poured a glass of wine, turned on a playlist she thought made her look cultured, and waited for him to come back. But this time he didn't. The camera in the hallway, the one she never knew existed behind the air vent, picked up her pacing. She was anxious, checking her phone every few minutes, typing something, deleting it, typing again, sending nothing. And then she did something unexpected. She went into my office. That room had been closed off since I left. She always hated it anyway. Said it felt too cold, too Wendell. I used to think she meant it as a joke. Now I knew better. I watched as she ran her fingers across the desk, as if she were trying to make contact with something she no longer had words for. Then she pulled open the drawer, and everything started to change. Inside that drawer, I left something on purpose. A single flash drive, unmarked, buried under some old tax documents. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist it if she found it. She didn't even hesitate. She plugged it into her laptop right there at the desk, chewing the inside of her cheek like she always did when she felt she might be doing something wrong, but hoped the payoff was worth it. The file auto-launched. It was titled, "Do you know who he really is?" The screen went black for a few seconds, and then the footage started playing. Not of her, not of me, of Calvin. Clip after clip, carefully curated, arranged in a timeline, time-stamped and labeled. Every one of them showing a different lie, a different woman, a different version of the same story. Him smiling the same smile, speaking the same lines, entering hotels, leaving apartments, always just out of reach of any one person connecting the whole pattern. But not anymore. Charlotte froze. She leaned in, blinking fast like her brain couldn't keep up with what her eyes were delivering. She clicked one of the folder tabs. Arizona, 2019. It opened a short voice memo. Calvin's voice? Unmistakable, telling someone else. Don't worry about her. She's just a bridge to something better. Her hand flew to her mouth. That was when the spell broke. Because for the first time, she saw herself not as a lover, not as a survivor, not as the new beginning to someone's broken past. She saw herself as a target. She slammed the laptop closed, then opened it again, double-checking, trying to find the origin. But there was none. No metadata, no IP trail, just the truth, plain and brutal. And the best part? The drive wasn't copied from a cloud. It was original. That meant one thing. Someone close had left it. Not a lawyer, not a PI, not a stranger. Someone who had been in the house. Her panic started to bloom. You could see it in the way she checked the windows, turned off the lights, pulled her phone, and started dialing. Not Calvin. Dana. But the call didn't go through. That was my doing. A minor interference. Enough to stall her. Just enough to keep her locked in that moment where every bad decision she had made now felt like it had teeth. And then, as if scripted, the front door opened. Rain behind him. Calvin stood there, dripping calm. But this time, Charlotte didn't run to greet him. She stood completely still. And he noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked. She didn't answer. Just stared, the laptop screen still faintly glowing behind her. He followed her gaze. That's when I saw it in his face, that flicker of recognition, that half-second of realization that she knew. And just like that, everything shifted again. Because when two people lie to each other long enough, the moment one discovers the truth, the entire dynamic flips. Charlotte was no longer his toy. She was now his liability. And I was no longer watching. I was waiting, because the real storm hadn't even started yet. Charlotte didn't sleep that night. I watched her pace the living room until nearly 4 a.m., Calvin on the couch pretending to be calm, but his eyes twitching every time she touched her phone. She wasn't yelling. That wasn't her style. But her silence had changed. It was no longer passive. It was defensive, watchful. At one point, she walked out of the room and came back with the flash drive in her hand. "What is this?" she asked. He didn't answer. "Who are those women?" she pushed, this time with something I hadn't seen in her in a long time, fire. Still, Calvin played it cool. "Someone's trying to mess with you. With us. You know that." She stared at him like she had just seen a ghost wearing his skin. "You said I was different," she whispered. He nodded. "You are." But it was too late. She had already seen the pattern. She wasn't the exception. She was just the current version. And she was done pretending not to know. That morning, before the sun came up, she did something I didn't expect. She left. Took nothing but a coat, her laptop, and a flash drive. No dramatic exit. No note. She didn't even slam the door. Just walked out into the misty gray morning and vanished down the street. Calvin didn't follow. He stayed in the house. For hours. Wandering between rooms. Occasionally sipping from a glass, stopping to stare at the empty space on the couch where she used to sit. It took until noon before he finally left, quietly, carrying only a small black bag. I watched him go, and I knew it was the last time he'd ever walked through that door. That same afternoon, I returned. The house was quiet, unnaturally so. I expected to feel strange, angry, haunted, unsettled. But I didn't. It felt peaceful. The ghosts had left with them. I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. The dishes were still in the sink. Her perfume still hung faintly in the air upstairs. But none of it hurt anymore, because I had made peace with the only truth that mattered. I hadn't lost anything. I'd only shed what was already gone. Later that evening, I met Dana again. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were screenshots of financial transactions Charlotte had quietly moved back into our joint account. Every dollar she had stashed away in that secret account returned without a word. There was also a note, handwritten, short. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. I see it now. I hope someday you don't look back at me with hate. But even if you do, I understand. I didn't cry. I didn't forgive her. But I let go. And that was enough." Months passed. I sold the house, moved to a quieter place upstate, near water, started working with people I actually liked, found an old hobby I'd long abandoned, restoring vintage radios. There's something calming about fixing things, not to make them perfect again, but to give them a second life with their scars still visible. One evening, as the sun went down behind the lake, I got a message on my phone. Just one sentence. Thank you for not destroying me. It was from her. I didn't reply, but I smiled, because the truth is, she was never mine to destroy. She had done that all on her own. All I did was show her the mirror and walk away before it cracked.